I'm involved in a rewilding project in the North Highlands of Scotland, just south of Loch Ness, and it's a place called Birchfield. I'm going to very quickly introduce the project and the rewilding project, talk very briefly about what happened to the forest in Scotland, and then the brief history of sheep and deer in Scotland, and then that will hopefully contextualize the issues that we're looking at and what we are trying to do. Birchfield is 100 acres of a former commercial forest just south of Loch Ness, and the portion of the land that we're going to be talking about most intensively is about 50 acres, and I'll get to that in a second.
I'm sorry, Emilia, to interrupt you, but your sound is really, really bad. So I don't know if it will help to adjust your microphone, or maybe if the connection is bad, just switch off your camera. It might help. But sorry to interrupt.
Okay, let me see. Okay, is this any better?
Not really.
Not really. Okay, let me see if I can switch off the camera. Hold on, unfortunately, I have to do that. Let me see if I can, let's see if that helps.
Yes, we can hear you
better now. Is that better? Okay, I'm going to resume sharing. Just let me know if that works. Slideshow. And hopefully that is, sorry. Okay, is that working?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So our goals are, like any rewilding project, to restore native forest, reintroduce locally extinct species with lots of caveats around that, inspire people to connect with the environment, and obviously vegan ethics are a fundamental part of our ethos. We think about that both in terms of the non-human and the human animals who are on site, and we ask everyone who stays on site to consume only plant-based foods as a very basic. The project, we use the IUCN CEM rewilding principles, and we work alongside a variety of partners and collaborators, including the University of Cumbria, the Lifescape Project, and ACOM, all to develop a natural capital accounting framework that records, quantifies, and values the environment and social changes on the site. And we can get into natural capital accounting at some point if you want, but because that has its own positive and negatives. But always one of our main goals is to engage with the community and try to do rewilding in a sort of a blue sky thinking. We don't have certain set specific goals in mind, more general aims. So what happened to the forests of Scotland? Early agriculture, by the time that the Romans arrived in Britain in 52 AD, 50% of the forests were already gone in Britain, which is usually a topic or a fact that surprises very many people. We tend to have an idealized view of what the past was like. Then continued deforestation, empire building, colonialism, wood used as fuel, and certain types of wood used for leather tanning and so forth. Particularly in Scotland, the clearances that were a forced removal of people from the land. They were generally tenant farmers. They were removed from the land for purposes of introducing more sheep and more intensive sheep farming on these very large estates. And from that, the development of large shooting estates and commercial forestry further eroded and eliminated forests in Scotland. And as you can see, that by the 19th century, woodland cover was only about 5%. So what you are seeing in that picture in front of you, you see there what we think of Scotland as a big empty space, or empty in terms of large trees. But what Scotland really would look like is more like the bottom of the picture, that has trees and a variety of vegetation. When people talk about rewilding and they think about Scotland, they say, oh, it's the deer that are eating all the trees, and that's the problem. Well, I will show you in these two slides how the problem is always more complex, as we know. So we have sheep domestication, then sheep brought to Britain by Neolithic settlers, and then by the Romans later on, bringing different types of sheep for cultivation and animal farming. And then with the addition of the clearances in 1750 that we already briefly talked about, there were even more sheep. Today we have 23 million sheep in the whole of Britain, in comparison to 2 million deer in the UK. The deer in Scotland, there's 4 different species of deer. There are the native, the red and roe deer, and arguably, certainly now also native, but not original. You have the fallow that were introduced by the Normans, and you have the sika, which is the Japanese word for deer, that were introduced in the 19th century. And they were introduced for ornamental and sport purposes. So one of the things that I like to point out is, if you're going to have a discussion about deer, you have to have a discussion about sheep. And all of these are uncomfortable discussions that people don't like to have, but we need to have them, and we need to talk about, we need to have grown-up conversations about these things. And the part of the land in question where we have, and I use this word very loosely, issues or problems with deer, is simply, it's a 50-acre plot of land that has been replanted, and we are hoping for natural regeneration. It is fenced in, and we didn't do the fencing. The previous owners did the fencing, and they fenced in a number of deer. Now, this was some years ago, and the deer have lived there for all their lives. Some of them were born in that space. And one of the things that I always say to people is, well, we have created this problem for them, but we are asking them to pay the ultimate price for something we did. And this often takes people aback because they've never thought of it that way. And one of the things that I always hope and try to do is to change people's perspective so that we can consider what we're doing in a much more holistic way. And if we want to regrow trees, because the environment in Scotland is so degraded, if you will, and doesn't offer as much, it doesn't offer as much space or as much different variety of spaces for the deer, and it doesn't offer as much tree cover as there really should be. If we're trying to grow trees in this particular 50-acre area, and we have approximately between 12 and 17, we're not exactly sure, a herd of deer living in that 50 acres. They get hungry, they want to eat. All of those things are natural. And they tend to eat the saplings, they tend to eat the natural regrowth, and you don't ever get full regrowth of the trees. Having said that, having the deer there, and as somebody else mentioned, they are functioning in other ways. They are churning up the soil, and you want that for grasses and for fungi. And we have quite a variety of grasses and fungi that are often not found elsewhere. So these deer are trapped in this space. We have we have tried different ways of getting them to leave to their own accord and into the hills surrounding us and into other spaces that are not fenced in. One of the first things that we tried was a sort of a deer drive using an infrared drone so we could see where they were. And the drone was high up. They weren't affected by the drone. We weren't harassing them in any way. And then just having people walk along so that we could push them towards an area that was open. And that sort of worked. We're pretty sure we're the only ones who, or at least the first when we did it, when we tried to do this, and it was relatively successful. But one of the problems is the drone, the infrared. When the deer go to ground, the infrared, or at least this particular one, there's probably fancier things now. When the deer go to ground, you can no longer see their heat signature. So you can't really tell where they are. So we learned that. We were somewhat successful. Some left, but some stayed. But then there are babies, and so there's more. The other thing that we are trying is a substance that is being used in commercial forests in the Scandinavian countries, and it's called trigo, and it's rendered sheep fat. Yes, I know it's a non-vegan product, but we are trying to not kill the deer. And so we're trying to get them to not like, to feel a bit uncomfortable in the space and look for food elsewhere. We have opened a section of the fence so that they can leave. We have put cameras on each side, and the deer haven't yet found it, or they don't really feel the need to find an out, because that is the space that they know, that 50 acres, that's their home, and they're comfortable there. They have everything that they need. So we're using this, and we're trying this, and this we did the spraying fairly recently. It was in October of this past year of 22. So we'll see how that works. And we have sprayed both the saplings that are in the grow tubes as well as some of the natural regrowth, as you can see from my hand at the bottom. And we're going to monitor that and see whether they are going to nibble at that or not. And we have set up different ways of how we sprayed it. And eventually, this is fresh spray, but eventually it gets sort of clear, so it does not affect the plants. And then obviously we also have the fencing that's meant to keep deer out. And there's other ideas about fencing, that you can create smaller fencing for different stands of trees so that the deer, if they can see all sides of the fencing, they don't tend to go in because they don't want to be trapped. And that's fine, but fencing has its own issues and tends to also create problems for other animals, so as well as being expensive. So you have to have a bit of a practical mind as well as an ethical mind, and in terms of economics. And so it's not necessarily a super practical thing to be putting little tiny fences all over the place. But nevertheless, that is something else. But one of the things that we are going to really focus on is disturbing the environment by simply walking in the space, and a consistent walking in the space. Now, one of the things, and again, we can go back through and think about the clearances and think about how ripples of history continue up until the present day. there isn't a consistent and frequent presence of people interacting with the environment. So you don't have people walking around in the forests all the time. And in Scotland, you have anyone can access any uh, land and walk around, and so it's not a matter of this private property or not. And so if you don't have enough people walking around and sort of keeping the a disturbance level to a certain point, the deer are perfectly comfortable and they're not going to go. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be focused on this coming spring and summer, and having people walk the length and breadth of that 50 acres on a consistent basis to encourage the deer to look for food elsewhere. And on the other side of the fence, we have a salt lick, which is useful to them, and they like it, especially during gestation and so forth. So that may encourage them to go over on the other side. But we're trying everything we can so that we don't have to kill them, because that is the last thing I want to do. Because that 50 acres cannot take 12 to 17 deer in one place, cannot take that browsing pressure. It's just entirely too much browsing pressure to allow any natural regeneration or any of the planted trees to grow. And not only that, it's also eventually going to be bad for them, because they'll browse everything out, and then they themselves are not going to have enough food to survive. So we are trying all these different things. Most people are not trying these things, and I feel even by trying and discussing this and putting this out there and being very public and open about it, we're changing the conversation, because the conversation really has to be about, well, we can't just go to the gun. We cannot just go to the killing as the default of controlling, or whatever it is, whatever term you want to use, because that does not consider the deer and the animals in any way. It doesn't even consider the humans who are actually doing the shooting, because that is also problematic in itself and creates PTSD and a variety of other problems. And I have heard this from a number of people. So merely trying, I think, is also something that's going to inspire people to look at things differently, whether they're on side in terms of being concerned about animals or being vegan or anything like that. We have had a lot of really good responses from people who are saying, I never thought of it like that. I never looked at it that way. And even the 23 million sheep versus the 2 million deer, that's always something that shocks people. So that's what we're trying to do. If anyone has any other ideas, please get in touch. These are my contact details. And I am always happy to hear about, hey, have you tried this? Or any other suggestions. I would be happy to hear it. And I will pop out of the presentation now.